Welcome to the Love and Guts podcast for the second time, Mr. Leech. Thank you for coming on.
Linda, it's great to be here.
I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you. And I actually said to you before we jumped on that it's the time that we need to hear it. A lot of us need to hear it. Patients and practitioners.
Yeah.
But before we get into the podcast, you were going to say something?
No, I'm totally agreed with you that it is the time to talk about grains, a very controversial topic.
Yes. If that is not enticing you already, guys, I don't know what will. But before we get into those questions, I just want to read your bio out because you've got a bit of an impressive bio behind you, which continues to grow and evolve. So Dr. Brad Leech is a PhD clinical nutritionist and herbalist, renowned for his expertise in addressing chronic autoimmune conditions and complex gastrointestinal disorders. He provides complete and personalized care to his patients using functional nutrition, integrated medicine, and holistic wellness. After entering the profession in 2008, Brad has contributed significantly to academia, shaping curricula at universities and delving into research areas such as intestinal permeability, autoimmune disease management, and the therapeutic potential of food-based probiotics. Brad is currently an adjunct fellow at the National Center for Naturopathic Medicine, where he continues to advance in natural health sciences. In addition to patient care, Brad is passionate about empowering practitioners with the knowledge to enhance their clinical practice. Over the years, he has mentored thousands of practitioners, providing them with the tools to navigate the complexities of gut health and autoimmunity. He offers two programs, Brad's Brainiacs. I just love that name, and I want you to get into that a little bit towards the end, what your offerings are. Microbiome mentoring and Brad's Brainiacs autoimmune mentoring. So now that impressive bio is done, can we get straight into it? Because
sounds good. Let's go
there's
for
so
it.
many questions, and I actually am going to try to get them all done in this next episode. So grains. Why do you think grain avoidance has become such a popular recommendation among health practitioners? And what are some of the key myths that need busting?
And this is one where I feel like many practitioners, we went to university, we learned what we did at university, and we come out, we start applying it in practice. But we've got to remember to grow with the science. And so half of me believes that one of the reasons why many practitioners are recommending a grain-free diet or a gluten-free diet is purely because we haven't looked at the literature recently. Because if we look at some of the slides from what we were taught at university, they would be saying gluten causes intestinal permeability, gluten causes inflammation, gluten causes brain fog, gluten causes weight gain, and the list continues. But when we actually spend the time to dig into the research, we go, hold on, there's this whole other side to say grains may not be as bad or gluten may not be as bad as what we once thought because newer, stronger, higher level of evidence has actually emerged.
So let's get into those myths though.
Yes. Where would you like to start?
Oh God, there's so many. So gluten always causes leaky gut.
Okay. So reference here, my PhD was on intestinal permeability. So I spent the better part of 6 years looking at all things intestinal permeability. And one of these big factors at play were gluten. What I want to highlight here is I went into my PhD, okay, after finishing my honors, and my honors basically said gluten is bad, okay, in the sense of, we asked practitioners, what type of recommendations are you advising to clients with intestinal permeability? The most common was the avoidance of alcohol. And then it went the avoidance of gluten and then particular probiotics and prebiotics and zinc, glutamine, and so forth. Many practitioners are recommending their clients to remove gluten from their diet. So I go into my PhD and it's an interesting one because there was this study, okay, and it was by Dr. Visano and his team, and it was published in Nutrients in 2015. And basically, and this research study started it all. It really was the foundation of why gluten was bad. So what they did in a lab setting, and this was in vitro research, they had 4 cell lines. They had active celiac disease in remission, non-celiac gluten sensitivity and control. So a biopsy, a cell line of those intestines. They added gluten to these cell lines and measured like a almost electrical current to grade intestinal permeability. What the research showed was, yes, those with active celiac disease had very severe intestinal permeability, but all cell lines had intestinal permeability induced. So the authors basically in their abstract said, gluten causes intestinal permeability in everyone. Now, that particular study, I looked back at my referencing software and I've quoted that study over 100 times in, the earlier parts of my research, because
Yeah.
it was the study that you went to say gluten causes leaky gut. Okay. That was in 2015. So that's really where that research kind of came from. But things to consider here is it's become almost outdated. And I'm going back to that question. You asked, what were the factors that can influence the recommendation of grain avoidance? The other one here is around the HLA gene. Okay, so there's actual research to show those with the HLA gene will have a worsening of intestinal permeability compared to those who don't have the gene. So, that's a factor at play. Other things to consider here is if the gut is inflamed. When the gut is inflamed, then you won't be able to tolerate the inclusion of gluten. Other factors at play that may influence someone's response to gluten would be how they prepare the grains, the amount that they're eating, and also the overall quality of the grains. Are they sprayed? How are they processed? So that's a bit of a background behind that.
And it was quite humbling when I interviewed Fasano years ago, and he did say that. He said, I don't believe everyone should be off gluten. There's no need. And I was like, mic drop, because a lot of people were at that point saying, take people off gluten. It's just bad news, where it's just not the case. Like you said, we need to dive a little bit deeper into the evidence, and especially the current evidence. So all grains cause inflammation is another myth. And all grains are bad for the microbiome. And so far from the truth, isn't it?
I love that one where there are authors out there within integrative medicine, and I won't say the names of the books, but there's books that really demonize grains. The carnivore diet is one that would demonize the grains. And I don't want to get into the debate around the carnivore diet, but I have seen the microbiomes of those following the carnivore diet. And I'm not talking, just culture-based microbiome reports. I'm talking metagenomic-based microbiome reports. And you're looking at all those species, and it looks absolutely terrible, those who are following a carnivore-style diet. And yes, short-term, the carnivore-style diet, it works. It reduces clinical symptoms, but it's not a long-term solution.
That's the kicker, isn't it? I think because people do feel good initially, they're kind of misled, into thinking that it's a great way of living or something really great for their microbiome. But I do wonder what research in the future will show about that way of eating and how destructive it was if we ever do any research around it. But I look at that way of eating and people doing it just ongoing as a diet, not even for a specific therapeutic.
We can thank social media for that, can't we?
Yeah, it's actually scary. It's actually scary.
Very, very scary.
When the gut, it's like, oh God, really? Please don't do that to yourself. So all grains cause inflammation. Grains are bad for the microbiome. Is that true?
It's not at all. In fact, grains are really good for the microbiome.
Yes.
I don't believe that there is sufficient evidence to make the claim that grains are bad for the microbiome. I think that it's more of like a misconception, because if you actually just Google the research around whole grains and rye and even wheat, it's not just beneficial for the microbiome, it's beneficial for a variety of different areas when it comes around to health. The main concept here is grains are an excellent source of fiber. and these fibers will feed the microbiome. I give you the example. We need, males need about 38 grams of dietary fiber per day. Women, 28 grams of fiber per day. That's the suggested dietary target set by the Australian government, the food guidelines. Now, I like to follow those recommendations. In some cases, I might go a little bit higher. But to reach 38 grams of dietary fiber per day, you need to be eating about 2.5 kilos of broccoli.
Mm.
Okay. Now, I like to opt for organic greens here. I don't know if you've seen the price of broccoli recently. It's about $15, $16 a kilo. So that's $30 a day just on broccoli, just to get your grains. It's not an achievable way, whereby if we add in the oats, some rye, and the vegetables, it makes it a lot more achievable to reach that target, which has research behind it to show it reduces cardiovascular disease, improves cholesterol levels, blood lipid levels, and even feeds up the microbiome.
And like you said, it's quite nuanced in the sense of you want to make sure that you're getting quality ingredients and preparing it well. I think these things make a big difference. And we're going to get into that a little bit later when we talk about reintroducing things. Humans didn't evolve to eat grains is another myth. Can you bust that one for us?
It's an interesting one. I'd love to get like an archaeologist's view on this, for them to say, well, no, there has been grains in the Egypt temples since 10,000 BC. I can't quote that. I'm not an archaeologist. But in fact, our microbiome has grown to be almost requiring grains to some degree. The big thing here is almost this distinction. When I say grains, I don't necessarily mean gluten, okay? Don't view this as, oh, Brad's recommending everyone eat gluten. By no means. That's not what I'm saying. I think I'm trying to portray that there are so many different grains, including rice, right? We have white rice, brown rice, red rice, green rice, black rice. We have a diverse range of rice. When eaten in moderation, forms a very healthy part of the microbiome, especially when it's cooled down rice. We can have higher amounts of resistant starch. There are many other different types of grains that can be beneficial to the microbiome. Even things like quinoa, buckwheat, are they a grain or are they more of a pseudo grain? Oats as well, millet and so forth. Barley, yes.
Go on. There's so many to choose from. And if you do the whole 50 plus food challenge, for your microbiome, like you said, there's so many different varieties of rice, for example. It's not that hard and overwhelming in a week to get that much variety in your diet when you're kind of breaking it down like that, the different types. Even when you look at fruits, breads, greens, apples, all that sort of stuff. So you mentioned that gluten doesn't always cause intestinal permeability. Can you explain the current research around this and what factors influence individual responses? So we've already touched a little bit on this. What other factors cause intestinal permeability?
Well, let's actually debunk this gluten and intestinal permeability. So I told you before about that original research that kind of alluded to the fact that gluten causes leaky gut. Okay. Yep. We need to remember we've got your hierarchy of evidence. At the very bottom, we've got in vitro research. And as we go up the hierarchy of evidence, we've got case studies and randomized controlled trials. And at the very top, we have a systematic review. What's quite interesting is above a systematic review. So what has more evidence, especially for clinicians, is something called a clinical practice guideline. So a clinical practice guideline, think of it as a really, really, really big systematic review, but it takes into the account two other concepts. It takes into the account the practitioners who are recommending different recommendations, and it takes into the account the patients, those who it affects. So that's exactly what we did within my PhD. We came out and we published the clinical practice guideline for the management of intestinal permeability. And we did this massive, massive systematic review looking at over 22,000 research articles. We narrowed it down to go, what recommendations should nutritionists, naturopaths, herbalists, integrative GPs, and other healthcare professionals, what should they be recommending when it comes around to intestinal permeability? And there were about 40 odd different recommendations that we gave around prebiotics, probiotics, vitamins, minerals, and so forth. And we had a number around gluten. Okay, so we looked at all of the evidence around gluten. In addition to looking at the research, we incorporated amazing individuals from Australia to review these recommendations. Our good colleague, Dr. Jason Hullerick, was on that advisory board, along with people like Narala Jacoby and many other clinicians and researchers. So they actually reviewed these recommendations in and around gluten. Now, we made a number of recommendations around only recommending a gluten-free diet in those with clinical symptoms after eating gluten, once you've ruled out all other pathology. So once you've looked for celiac disease, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and other conditions, we concluded that within the management of intestinal permeability, a low gluten diet can be advised in those who don't have clinical symptoms after consuming gluten. Yep. Low gluten defined by less than 16 grams of gluten per day, which is kind of equivalent to maybe a piece of toast or two. Yeah. So it's not a whole pizza, it's not a whole pasta, but it's a smaller amount of gluten. Now, there were 3 or 4 key articles that helped us form this decision. One study was in a group of healthy males. Now, before I hear, the echoes, we can't do research on purely males. I acknowledge that. Unfortunately, some researchers, they will only do research on males because they are, in quotation marks, easier to do research on. But that's not clinical practice. Okay, that's not what we see in clinical practice. But anyway, we digress. This particular study, they had 20 healthy individuals and they measured them for intestinal permeability before and after gluten consumption on a randomized double-blind crossover study. So both sets of groups had a gluten-free diet and the other group had a gluten-containing diet with a washout phase of about 8 weeks. Now, there was no changes in intestinal permeability. There was no changes in GI symptoms. So that particular study said, well, hold on. In this demographic, in healthy young males, gluten does not cause intestinal permeability. So straight away, we start this debunking the myth of maybe, just maybe, it doesn't cause intestinal permeability in everyone.
Yeah.
Okay? But I really wanted to see this in a disease state and mixed sexes as well. So there was another study with 34 individuals with IBS, male and female, and they put them on a gluten-containing diet with 16 grams of gluten. What was really interesting about this study is it was a gluten-free diet versus a gluten-containing diet, removal of FODMAPs. So they took out FODMAPs as a potential driving factor that could contribute to whether it's permeability or digestive symptoms, trying to control whether or not gluten was to blame. Really interesting here. They also ruled out anyone with celiac disease and the HLA gene. Okay, so no one with HLA positive genes for celiac disease were included. Now, after the study, so the study was a number of weeks, but they measured 1 week. There was no intestinal permeability. In IBS individuals with 16 grams of gluten. However, there was bloating, abdominal pain, tiredness, changes in bowel motions. So maybe gluten contributes to digestive symptoms, but it doesn't necessarily contribute to intestinal permeability.
Yeah.
And a side note here, the clinical presentation of intestinal permeability is not digestive related symptoms. We've seen that, and I've shown that in the literature 2 or 3 times in a number of studies whereby, those digestive symptoms of changes in bowel motions, abdominal pain, bloating, they are not linked up with intestinal permeability. So from that, one last study was included in our analysis. And it was really interesting because it divided those who were HLA positive and HLA negative. This is the celiac gene again, 45 individuals with IBS type D, male and female. And they put individuals on 18 grams of gluten or a gluten-free diet for 4 weeks. What they did find was a greater severity of intestinal permeability in positive HLA individuals compared to negative. Overall, when you group them together, there was an increase in intestinal permeability, but those that were negative, it was like the p-value was like 0.043, which is almost non-significant. And it goes to show that maybe there's more to this story.
Yeah.
So in my practice, yes, there are situations where I will be recommending a gluten-free diet. Okay, I do. Maybe once a week, once a fortnight, I am recommending a gluten-free diet. They are those with clinical symptoms to gluten, with the HLA gene, or they've got other health conditions, excluding, let's say, the obvious celiac disease, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. But in some cases of Hashimoto's, I will be recommending a gluten-free diet. Not always, but sometimes I'll be recommending a gluten-free diet. When there's a flare of inflammatory bowel disease, I'll be recommending a gluten-free diet. And when there are clinical symptoms after the consumption of gluten.
And which is why I'm a big fan of testing for intestinal permeability, especially because if we're throwing high dose things like gluten mine at it, you want to make sure you're dealing with the right thing, intestinal permeability. So on that note, slight tangent, are you using the lactulose and mannitol test as your gold standard way of testing?
This is a really, really interesting question and a whole other podcast, but I have a lot to say on
I
it.
know that zonulin is so nuanced and a lot of people hanging their hat on the zonulin test. And I'm like...
So there's a few things to consider. Serum-based zonulin within clinical practice is not an accurate marker for intestinal permeability. Put that to the side. I know that there's tests out there that are looking for immune response to LPS and serum zonulin. No, I've done comparisons and they do not correlate. So that they are not a test that I would utilize in practice. The concept of the lactulose mannitol test, yes. However, currently standing in Australia, the test that is available is an inaccurate representation of intestinal permeability. I know. Shock. I can see the look on your face.
Yeah.
This research out of New Zealand in around 2019 came out to say that urine collection should be 2 hours or 2 to 4 hours for measuring small intestinal permeability. On the market in Australia, the lactulose mannitol test is the collection for 6 hours.
Yeah.
So it's actually not the gold standard because it's collecting urine for too long. Now, the way that we can get around this is when we have data on the reference value, right? Rather than just taking what the lab says, because what the lab says does not necessarily reflect what a healthy individual's permeability would look like. The reason I say this is because high quality research, they will utilize the lactulose mannitol test. And in many cases, it will be 4 to 5 hours, sometimes 6. But what they'll do is before doing the study, they will create their reference range based on the amount of sugar they're consuming in healthy individuals. Okay, and they publish that data. And so we know that is a true reference range. So how I go about measuring intestinal permeability in clinical practice is acknowledging there is no gold standard, and I will actually utilize stool zonulin. However, the caveat here is there is no correlation between stool zonulin and lactulose mannitol test because they are measuring 2 different types of intestinal permeability. One, the sugar test is measuring chronic long-term intestinal permeability, where stool-based zonulin is measuring actively induced intestinal permeability. Because it's an acute phase protein, it's got a relatively short half-life, meaning that it's only going to be identifying permeability, which is actively being stimulated, not necessarily from gluten, but from stress and NSAIDs and dysbiotic bacteria. On top of the zonulin, I'll be looking for things like butyrate, hexa-LPS, hydrogen sulfide, just to name a few, to almost help form whether or not there is
potential intestinal permeability picture. Yeah.
exactly, and what's driving it.
Yeah.
Is it the microbiome that's driving that intestinal permeability?
Yep. Yep. Because not all people produce zonulin. Is that correct?
There is about 5 to 8% of the population that have SNPs where they do not produce the protein zonulin. And that will be very obvious on the report of a microbiome test, whereby it will say, less than X, Y, or Z, where it's like a non-detectable amount. But normal healthy individuals, they'll have zonulin 20, 30, 40, 50. It's only when it goes above that 100 mark where it's an actively induced intestinal permeability.
So insightful. Thanks for that tangent. Back to what we were talking about, grains. Let's talk about quality and processing of grains. What are the most important distinctions between refined, industrially processed grains and their more traditional whole food counterparts?
And this is one where we need to dig into our clients' diet to better understand how they're eating their grains. For example, I had a client just the other day. I have oats for breakfast. Fantastic. You're having organic, steel cut rolled oats, which were overnight or cooked with water, and you're adding in some protein powder, maybe some collagen. No. They're having instant oats in the microwave, inorganic, with milk or plant-based milk. Completely different response to the microbiome and to our blood sugar as well.
Yeah.
So they did this really interesting study whereby they looked at basically the size of the oats and the impact it has on blood sugar. Okay. Although we're talking about the microbiome, blood sugar, those who had those, oats that are in the microwave, 90 seconds and they're done, and it's almost like a powdery oat, their blood sugar through the roof.
Yeah.
Whereby whole grain oats, which basically it's flattened, it's actually going to have a more stable response to blood sugar. I would always add in maybe a little bit of MCT oil, some collagen. Overnight oats will have higher amounts of resistant starch, thereby a lower glucose response. So when it comes around to the quality and processing of the grain, size does matter. So really refined powdery oats will impact your blood sugar a lot more than, rolled oats that are overnights with a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein as well. Other ones here is when we look at ancient grains, they collectively across the board had lower amounts of gluten. Yep. The farming process, and here in Australia, we're relatively lucky. This is a lot worse in America, whereby their farming process would select the grains with the higher amount of gluten because that's what the bakers were looking for. Yep. Another side note, I was in the bread aisle the other day, high protein wraps. I'm like, oh, let me have a little look at these. Added gluten. I'm like, great, that's going to induce intestinal permeability because it's this, higher amount. So yes, that's one aspect. The last one, and we know this, is organic versus inorganic. And I think that this is the biggest thing we need to consider when it comes around to choosing the quality of the grain is when we're trying to introduce the grain back into our client's diet, we want to be utilizing organic grains above all, because inorganic grains are sprayed with Roundup across the whole crop just before harvesting. And they do that to increase the volume, the weight. If they increase the weight, they can sell it for more. So organic, I'm not preaching organic, but there are particular foods, your berries, your leafy greens, and your grains, they need to be organic.
And luckily grains are pretty inexpensive. So going organic shouldn't break the bank when it comes to those things. So what else do we need to say around traditional processing, soaking and fermenting and sprouting?
And not the typical fermentation, like real old school fermentation. Did you go through that phase in 2020, baking your own sourdough bread?
I didn't. No.
I felt like
I was having a baby in that year, mate. I was in a bubble.
You didn't have time to be making sourdough bread.
No.
Yes, a fermented sourdough bread, great. I'm a huge fan of sprouted bread.
No, I guess I can see that you're the Pure Life Bakery.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's that
Love it.
dense bread that's
Like a
in the
cake.
fridge.
It's just amazing.
It's amazing. It is amazing. And it's sprouted. And when it's sprouted, it's going to have higher amounts of more absorbable protein. It's going to be easier to digest because there's particular enzymes that will help to break down the gluten.
Yeah. I have to say, when I have, say, the Pure Life Bakery rye or the Kamut or Ezekiel and all those different types that they've got, even if I need to have a breakfast on the hurry, which I don't recommend, I feel like adding a bit of egg or avocado and whatever it might be, mushrooms or some veg on it, making it really simple. I feel like I'm sort of pimping up my nutrients by that actual sprouted bread. You know what I mean? Like it's just that extra, not just your typical white sourdough or whatever it might be. Like, it's
And I'll
dense.
do that on a regular basis. Other than 2 pieces, it's just 1 piece, 3 eggs, avocado, maybe some baked beans, to reach that 30 grams of protein, with a sufficient amount of fiber and some healthy fats.
Yeah. Yum. So good. So, how does avoiding grains long term impact the gut microbiome, and what benefits can certain grains offer in terms of microbial diversity and gut health?
And it's one of those things where you can see it a mile away when somebody has been avoiding grains. One of the biggest benefits when it comes around to consuming grains is the ability to feed the microbiome. So when someone's avoiding the grains, they're just not feeding the microbiome.
Yeah.
Did you ask about benefits of grains?
Benefits to microbial diversity and gut health overall.
Yeah. So we know that they increase short chain fatty acids. So there are sufficient studies. Let's take rye as an example. Rye would be my favorite grain. Although I eat oats on a regular basis, I think rye is an undervalued grain that we should actually be recommending in clinical practice. Yeah. So there is studies to show that rye will increase butyrate producing species and then thereby more butyrate. It will also increase acetate, and we know that 24% of acetate gets converted over to butyrate. Outside of the microbiome, the consumption of rye can reduce blood lipids in our blood. It can improve insulin resistance. It can actually reduce inflammatory markers and reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes by the production of a compound called IPA, your 3-indole propionic acid, along with the reduction of branched chain amino acids. So researchers, they were very fascinated with rye. And so there is a lot of high quality research to say rye is a great grain. What I will say, and I'll do a shout out to a colleague of mine, Kira Sutherland, excellent sports nutritionist. She's an absolute hoot. And I was giving this presentation a little while ago, and Kira was in the front row, and I mentioned this particular stat to the audience, and I could just see Kira's face like an absolute horror. The research amount that they did in these studies to show the benefit for the microbiome, for blood lipids and everything in between was between 30 to 50 grams of dietary fiber per day from rye. Okay. That is not just your suggested dietary target. That is 50 grams. Poor Kira almost had a heart attack being a sports nutritionist. But I just wanted to highlight that it was a higher amount of this product needed to make that change.
Yeah. Well, oh God, some of the things that sports nutritionists recommend when you're like, especially with the different types of sports that, say if it might be a marathon or whatever to up the calories and whatever, I'm like,
but have you looked into sports nutrition, sports individual athletes, might I say, and their microbiomes? Oh,
no.
Absolutely shocking. I've seen a number of them. I'm doing a bit of mentoring with a sports nutritionist. She keeps bringing me all of her microbiome cases of these athletes. And I'm like, no wonder you're underperforming. Look at your gut. It is terrible. It's inflamed. It's lacking diversity. There's inflammation going through the roof. So if you are involved with supporting clients who are athletes, look at their microbiome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you saying, what do you attribute the biggest drivers are to that sort of presentation in the microbiome? Is it the nutrition alone, or is it excessive exercise in some? Maybe not in all, but like, exercise is very important for the microbiome and motility and all those things. But is there a point where excessive exercise is going to be detrimental?
So there's a systematic review in 2018 from Monash University looking
I
at,
love that you just spit them out like,
and I have no notes in front of me. It's just
yeah.
in my head. That's called a PhD.
Yeah.
This particular study, I know I could recall Peter. No, I can't recall his name. Monash University, and they did a systematic review looking at the amount of exercise athletes can do before they start inducing intestinal permeability.
Mm.
Right, 2 hours at 70% of your best. Yeah,
Daily. Wow.
per exercise sitting.
Right. Yeah.
So if you exercise for more than 2 hours, there's intestinal permeability. If
Yeah.
you do these
Wow.
high hit sprints for 45 minutes, intestinal permeability.
Mhm.
So that is one factor at play, because there's this whole downstream effect of that intestinal permeability going on to driving maybe inflammation and changes in the microbiome. But then you've also got that dietary aspect as well.
Yeah. 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 Especially around events.
Yes.
Um, so what are some of the signs that someone might have been grain-free for too long? Are there clinical patterns or symptoms that you commonly see in these cases?
One of the worst microbiomes, I would almost say on par with those following a carnivore style diet, whereby everything's coming back in the red. The presentations are food sensitivities, food reactions, whereby their diets are just becoming more and more narrow because they're avoiding everything. They are chronically inflamed individuals, typically what I see in my practice. But the types of, let's say, clinical presentation in the sense of pathology, you would be seeing low diversity. Okay. Now we know typically around 200 species in the gut is what we like to see in a healthy microbiome. Going for the gold standard, the golden poo at about 250. But these individuals, they will have fewer than 100 species. Okay. I'll also see really low butyrate producing species.
Yeah.
Now, ideally, from a relative abundance butyrate production, we want around 20 to 30% of the microbiome having the capacity to produce butyrate. There is some research to say that that could even be higher. So I usually see in those individuals avoiding grains, butyrate around that 15%, maybe even 10%. The big one here is mucin degradation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mucin degradation is basically a mathematical bioinformatics calculation to say how much of the microbiome has the capacity to utilize mucin, that mucus layer in the gut, as a fuel source. Now, we know that the microbiome can utilize mucin, protein, and fiber as a fuel source, and in some degree, fats. But the microbiome prefers to use fiber, prefers to use resistant starch, beta glucans, and so forth as their preferred fiber source. When there's insufficient fiber in the diet, the microbes will change, and those species that can utilize mucin will flourish, and they'll basically start to eat you from the inside out. Although that's scientifically not correct,
But we know what you're saying. But
I like to describe it to clients of, it's your microbiome eating you from the inside out. And they go,
yeah.
ooh, I don't want that. And yes, we've got the celebrity, Akkermansia musophilia is the number one celebrity around mucin degradation, but there are hundreds, thousands others that could be high in the microbiome that could be making this shift. Yeah. The other one I would say is within a microbiome report is high pathobionts.
Yeah.
So just Klebsiellas and E. coli's and those species that just aren't friendly to the microbiome, they are typically high and those that aren't consuming sufficient dietary fiber.
Mm. High hydrogen sulfide producers, those sorts of things.
Yep, hydrogen sulfide producers would be a big one.
Yeah. And it's a bit of a vicious cycle, isn't it? Because like you said, people's response to certain foods when they've been on such a narrow diet might be, oh, they're not responding well. And so they start to reintroduce these things and say, look, see, I told you that grains weren't good for me, or that doesn't make me feel good. But we're going to talk about the reintroduction and how we do that slowly, methodically, and at what pace and what to start with first to make it more manageable for people, especially if they've been off grains for such a period of time. So you've developed a slow and slow reintroduction method. Let's get into that now. Could you walk us through what that looks like and why it's important to go gradually?
And I think this is the key takeaway for listeners. Go low, go slow. If someone has been avoiding grains and they go out and eat a pizza, oh, Brad recommended me to eat more grains, and they go out and eat Domino's pizza, they're never going to come back and see me because they're going to get bloated or changes in bowel motions. They're going to feel distension. Their body just isn't tolerated. They won't be able to tolerate these grains. So we need to start low and slow. And I've done this with countless patients, and it takes time.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to be able to successfully bring back grains. In that sense of there are many areas that we need to do before we introduce grains. So we need to remove the aggravating factors. We need to rebuild the gut barrier. We need to soothe the gut lining. We need to restore microbial diversity. Once we've done all of those factors, then we can start to reintroduce grains. And that the way that we do this is with a really, really low amount. And when I say low amount, I'm talking about a teaspoon.
Yeah.
I give the example. And this method I also apply with legumes and lentils, which are, they fall into that category of people avoiding them because they cause digestive upsets. If I asked you, can you eat 1 grain of oat? You'd look at me and go, yeah, of course I can eat that.
Yeah.
And then I go 2 or 3 or 4 until you get to that point of, could you eat a teaspoon or a tablespoon? And you'd be like, oh yeah, maybe. So starting with a really small amount, and in many cases, it's about a teaspoon.
Yeah.
You start with a teaspoon of whether it's fermented grains, organic grains, because we're trying to retrain the body to be able to tolerate these foods. I give you an example. Yes, we can do this with an egg allergy. So with an egg allergy, right, the process is you take an egg and you hard boil it about 18 minutes until it's almost like a gray egg. And you take a pinch, and I'm showing you on video now. It's like a tip of your teaspoon, the tiniest amount, 1, 2, 3 grams of the egg. And you give it to, generally it's a child. And you do that every day, okay? And you slowly increase the amount. And then over time, you cook the egg less, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, and so forth, until after about 18 months, you can actually eat a soft-boiled poached egg without having an allergic response. Similar concept here, although it's not an IgE immune response, we are allowing the body to adapt to these FODMAPs, to these complex carbohydrates that our microbiome contains the enzymes to break them down. Yep. Slowly, reintroduction.
And I think even though it's slow, I think it's a good way to get people's head around changing that narrative in their head as well, because they might be fearful of bringing these foods back in. So if we're suggesting a teaspoon of a grain, they're going to be able to tolerate that mentally better than, okay, we'll have to sit down to half a cup of whatever it might be. So I think mentally it's useful to go low and slow as well.
Mm-hmm. I just a clinical tip, ice cube trays are really great because you imagine, okay, and I did this process for a young boy recently, a 1-year-old that couldn't tolerate any foods. Although it's not in relation to grains, this was just carrots and apples, to be able to increase the tolerance. We started off with really well-cooked carrots as a way to, be able to increase tolerance to food. And the mother basically boiled the carrots, mushed it up, and froze it into, ever increasing sizes and put it into the freezer. So every day you're just pulling out a small amount, you're letting it defrost, you're eating it. So it's a way to reduce or maybe increase compliance around implementing this type of process.
And outside of the low and slow, are you suggesting anything else, like to start with any particular grains? And you mentioned as well, like cycling different types within a month. So can you talk to us about that a little bit?
So I've basically, there's a scale, or almost like a checkpoint to see where does a client fit when it comes around to reintroducing grains. If they are the most sensitive, they start at the very beginning. And at the very beginning, it's rice. Rice is the most tolerated grain. Okay. Most people potentially can tolerate rice. And so it's okay. You start off with rice and you work your way through a list of grains that increase in their complexity within their allergens until you get to wheat. So it goes, rice and millet and buckwheat, quinoa, emirates, oats, rye, spelt, wheat, and so forth. And it's a way to give a structured approach to go, okay, in the first 2 weeks, in the first 3 weeks, it's rice. Okay. We're going to increase rice. We're going to have rice every day. We're going to have a variety of rice, white rice, brown rice, red rice, and so forth. Mix it up. And then we're going to bring in millet. Okay. We've got different types of millet as well. Consume that. And it's this gradual approach in some individuals whereby they can tolerate rice, they can tolerate millet, but they can't tolerate quinoa. Then you would go, all right, we'll start in and around quinoa, small amount, rinse it well, diversify the colors of quinoa, and start that process whereby every day, every couple of days, we are incorporating a small amount, and then we're rotating it. We're ensuring that you're still bringing in the brown rice, the white rice, the millets, the buckwheat, and so forth to basically ensure that we're feeding a diverse range of microbes in our gut.
Yeah. And anything else around the reintroduction protocol that you think it's a bit of a clinical pearl for us?
Make it enjoyable.
Yes.
Bring it in.
Think the idea of bringing back grains is enjoyable. It is actually an exciting concept for some.
Yes. Yeah. Because it's like, great. I can potentially in, 6, 12 months time, go out with my friends and have avocado on toast. Everyone loves that. In saying that, I grew up on a gluten-free diet. My mother back in the early 90s, it was gluten was bad. And this was before there was any research. Those gluten-free products, I don't know if anyone can recall, they were hard.
Horrendous. They're mostly made out of corn, and they were just...
When now sometimes I'll go to a cafe and my wife, she still follows a very much gluten-free diet, just due to her own health. She'll go the gluten-free bread. And sometimes, I'll do the rye or the sourdough and I win the bread competition. Other times it comes out and it's this beautiful seeded one from
seedy, yes.
I'm jealous of that gluten-free bread. So my last one when it comes around to incorporating them is make it enjoyable.
Yes.
Incorporate it as part of a Mediterranean style diet. Grains are high in carbs. Yeah. We don't want to go starting more problems by increasing too many carbohydrates. So balance that out with your fats, with your proteins, and make it enjoyable. Bring joy to people's life.
Yeah. Look, I think grains will bring a bit of joy. I think a lot of people do enjoy grains. They're just fearful of it. They're just actually just scared of it.
Yeah, it's quite scary. Like a lot of people are afraid to bring back grains.
Well, that's the other question I had. Like, in your experience, what's the emotional or psychological landscape for people reintroducing grains after avoiding them for years, especially when fear of food rules are involved?
I like to give the analogy of it's as embedded into somebody's subconscious as religion.
Yeah.
They have a fundamental belief that grains are bad. Okay. They have, read blogs on the internet. They've asked AI and they have almost, in a sense, been brainwashed to believe that grains are bad. And we've got to be very strategic on how we have this conversation, because you can't just come in and say, oh, you've got to bring back grains. No, because we've got to almost give them the evidence. Say, hey, look at your microbiome report. You've got low this, low this. The way that we increase it is with X, Y, and Z. Make them feel rest assured that you've done this before, that it's a slow process, that we're trying to, balance it out. We almost need to act as a health coach in a way. Health coaches do this really well, and they've got training where they communicate with the client on a weekly basis over text message. I honestly, I don't do patient support over text message. I can't keep track of that. But there are health coaches that do that, and they go, yeah, great job, keep it up. We need to encourage that. And I feel like in my practice, education is key. Education is fundamental. If I can show the client, not necessarily the research, but why in their case grains are important, they're more likely to follow that recommendation rather than just that blanket rule of start bringing back grains.
Absolutely. I rarely or never provide a prescription without, this is why I want you to take this supplement, why I'm asking you to consume this or take this out or whatever. It wouldn't land for me. I can't imagine it would land for anyone else.
Yes.
So I can hear my son in the background crying. So, and I'm very mindful and respectful of your time. Is there anything that before we get into your offerings for practitioners and patients, is there anything that you feel you would like to address around the topic of introducing grains, or grains overall?
What I would say is I was never pro grains. I was very much pro gluten free I'm talking years. It's only in the last maybe 6 years that I've started to question this. And it's because, I develop education and so forth. My job is to look at the literature. So I encourage practitioners to be open-minded when looking at the literature. Just look at systematic reviews and randomized control trials of whole grains, even if it's wheat consumption. The evidence is huge.
Yeah.
Okay. We need to grow with the science. We need to understand that things are evolving, and maybe grains are an important part in our client's journey. Is it the first recommendation I give to clients? No. I will heal their gut. I will increase microbial diversity. But after that 6 months of working with them, it's that conversation of let's bring back grains into your diet to have a balanced, diverse dietary intake.
Yeah, I love it. I love you sharing your personal experience with coming from that place of being gluten-free and potentially low grain. So do you want to talk to us, or you want to share what your offerings are in regards to your brainiacs?
Yeah, definitely. So I work with patients. At the moment, there's about a 2-3 month wait for new patients. I do a lot of practitioner mentoring. So I've got Brad's Brainiacs microbiome mentoring and autoimmune mentoring. And they run annually 6-month program around, microbiome, how we can measure the microbiome, how we can address the microbiome. And then my second course, the autoimmune disease one, that actually starts end of August. It's the first time I'm running it. It's a brand new program. I've been very lucky enough to spend the better part of the last couple of months really developing all of the content for it. And I'm really excited to share it with so many practitioners. And it's all about how can we manage our clients with autoimmunity, going from the risk factors of intestinal permeability, dysbiosis, inflammation, immune dysregulation, to looking at pathology, blood pathology, microbiome pathology, and then diving deep into endocrine autoimmune conditions, gastrointestinal autoimmune conditions, and then how we can integrate integrative medicine, nutritional medicine, naturopathic medicine to better support our clients with autoimmune conditions.
Sounds amazing. And I'd love to hear what you do with grains in that department, in the autoimmune department.
No, it's
that's a whole podcast in itself, I'm sure. But thank you so much for coming on today. I'm sure, hopefully we'll get you back on again. I always love chatting with you, Brad.
It's great to be here and always nice to see you.
And guys, if you've enjoyed this conversation or you know someone in your life that needs to hear it, I'm sure loads of people do when it comes to this conversation, Please make sure you share this episode with them. And while you're at it, please subscribe to Love and Guts. And so people can fill up on the valuable content that Dr. Brad Leech has presented to us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.